So here's what's happening in my life. This is my childhood craft. It was maybe good enough to base a career on, but I didn't know it at the time. For me, art beyond a hobby was all about drawing, which I wasn't very good at. At Dartmouth, with an undeclared major, I took a wood sculpture course. Despite this pretty good carving on the right, and a subsequent clay slab project not blowing up in the kiln, which the teacher said by all rights it should have, my notion that art is drawing held firm. One teacher asked why I was in art school if I hadn't taken to drawing. I happily got an art teaching certificate, but afraid I'd get stuck if I ended up not liking teaching since I wasn't an artist. I enrolled in an oceanography program. It enthralled me. But I quickly found out I had a learning disability, wallowed 6 years in a 2-year program, and was derailed by statistics. I chopped off my long hair, started wearing black, quit school, and finally, I felt like an artist. David Smuss said I could carve, so I gave it a go. I made an iris that made a friend of mine cry, and a pitcher plant that made even me think, oh my God, how did I do that? The most I've ever become addicted to anything was right then, carving. Walking by flowers was almost painful because I couldn't wait to get home and carve. I was featured in Main Home and Design, got in the Philadelphia Furniture Show, Mosher's showroom in New York, got this cover photo, was asked to show at CFC, life was good. I was quite certain I could carve happily for the rest of my life. In that hard-earned, relaxed space, I read a little bit. My affinity for natural sciences drew me to Bill McKibben's Earth, not even knowing what it was about, just Earth. It was kind of an oh my God moment. My science background suddenly became invaluable to me. I kept watching the New York Times science section for what was going on with global warming. Nothing. Something was not right. I found a group addressing the issue at the scale deserved by volunteer lobbying for a national price on carving. I lurched a bit towards activist art. Carving languished. I actually submitted This Got Balls to MCA. There is logic to it. It didn't get accepted. This was my first effort to make a statement with my art. I became increasingly uneasy with lobbying. Not only could I not talk about economics any better than statistics, but their idea of communicating was text. 20 different sizes, shapes, and colors, but text on the left. My new uninvited obsession became, how do I use art to make a statement? Plan A, do a show and describe my work as inspired by nature, raising awareness for climate change. My fan base didn't swell in numbers, and climate change didn't stop. Phrases like raise awareness for climate change and show what we're losing became blah, 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 blah. Wasn't my rose still just a rose? Plan B, show the conflict we face. I made this piece with nature battling carbon. It felt kind of like bludgeoning the point. I didn't get into many shows, so a friend of mine, Jean Ann Pollard, and I made our own shows in whatever spaces we could find. I tried enlarging my conversation. Sunflowers for Sustainability represents my intense need to deal with the subject. I use sustainable practices in my work, arrange talks at the show about carbon pricing, donate 50% to the climate solutions. Viewers were still like, wow, how did you get the wood so thin? Still lobbying, I felt climate change was outpacing man's effort to comprehend it. So I became art coordinator for 2 conferences in DC. Turns out my allowed space was 6 feet by 2 feet. So I shortened my message to art is worth 1,000 words, use it. So what do I communicate? How do I do a show? How do I save the world? There's this national bill I want you to vote for. I got some PR, but still felt I was just sticking my art into my desired context. Dan Caney said, not for one of my shows, but he said, it's not enough to announce your ideological position to your audience. The show doesn't critically identify the problem. I went one step further. I wanted to identify the solution. The current CMCA show is based on the premise that awareness leads to action. But what's the nature of that action if solutions are evasive? I was lobbying for a solution. There are critical considerations surfaced. Do our new images resonate with our coveted conservative audience? And this painting here is by Marcia Donahue. She describes how this picture of a shared, local, well-loved spot was instrumental in bridging the political divide with the Katahdin National Monument fight. And the kids' art there is a lot of news is about kids' voices, and McKibben points out that their voices can't be pigeonholed into party rhetoric. So I brought my students' voices to my March lobby conference. What better speaks to a bipartisan audience about the need for a government action? We've got their whole world in our hands. So back at home, my work evolves. My old business card was just the calla lilies. My new business card includes the text on the back. I think more about the story my art tells, sustainability with all it implies to the core. Educated by my lobby work, I consider my audience. My rose is now North Maine woods, filled with 12 tree species from northern Maine, including spruce and birch. Spruce has shallow roots that easily dry in the heat, but birch loves the heat. This connects to a broader base, sharing my story, how I know how. Everything I do now is about climate, because it's what's in my heart. I was relieved to read a recent article about how everyone needs to just make climate change part of everyday conversation. It kind of let me off the hook with my internal pressure to make my rose speak about national carbon pricing. This gives me a sense of purpose rather than hopelessness. This year is the year of climate change in galleries in the US, and the Endangered Acts, the England Arts and Cultural Institutions are declaring climate change a national emergency. I'm glad to see bigger institutions taking on the topic. I'll take care of my sphere of influence in Brownville, Maine.
This is anatomy of a boulder. It's sort of the culmination of my early work, which was an exploration of splitting stone. I split a 20-ton boulder 500 times into 50 pieces and then assembled it like a puzzle. I did it all using tools that I hand forged from car springs. As I kind of evolved, I wanted to build a way to move the pieces as one piece rather than as 50 pieces. So I would drill through the stone before I split it apart. This is called Tidal Moon. It's now at the Portland Jetport. It's about 12 feet tall, weighs about 6 tons. This is a similar technique. I first carved a sort of a 6-foot cylinder and then split it into this sort of twisted form and then drilled through it and then split it apart and then carved the inside pieces. And they're carved so that they fit back together like a puzzle. So that's why they fit so tightly together. My work evolved. I refurbished an old wire saw. You can't use diamond wire. So I was splitting the pieces apart, and then I could sort of make strategic cuts with diamond wire. This is called torqued torqued link. And so after I take it apart, I manipulate the pieces around. This piece is kind of a similar series, but it looks like it comes apart, but it's actually all one piece. So initially, I sort of split this twisted form. I start directly in the quarry. It was a 14-ton stone that I split in the quarry. I like working with natural boulders. I also like working with quarried stones. After I finished the Schoodic International Sculpture Symposium, a 10-year project, I really wanted to focus my time on larger public art projects. This is the Lost Fisherman's Memorial in Lubec, where I designed sort of this whole park-like space. It had to be a named memorial, but I made the whole space a sculpture. This is the most recent project I finished for the Falmouth School. It was a competition. I won the competition, and then I needed to find a 20-plus ton egg-shaped stone. I looked around the Blueberry Barrens in down East Maine, found one, found the owner. He said he had rocks to spare. That's why I work with boulders. They're very economical. And so I went up there and split the stone, and then the stone split good, so then we went up there. I do this all. My father is my assistant, and so when I get these projects, I can make a living off it because I do 90% of the work. So I get out of the truck, I come back here, I take the photo, I get back in the truck, then we go back, we get the crane, and we drive the crane back, and we unload it. And I have these great walkie-talkies that I can communicate with my father. And so it's been a great working relationship. This is the studio that, again, my father and I built, along with my wife, too, after we got married. And so this was built from the trees that were on the site. I transport the pieces back there. I built this sort of special carriage that I could roll inside that has a turntable, so I could fit these 15-ton pieces on there. The boulder actually weighed 26 tons when I weighed it. So it was an 11-ton piece and a 15-ton piece. And then it's kind of a new style where I have to figure out these very precise angles and then drill these angles into the stone. And then I thread it with this diamond wire and kind of manipulate the stone so that I can cut it. And then I divided up all of these pieces, these internal pieces, into building blocks. Here you can see more pieces in the background there. And then I drill a center hole through them, and then I kind of grind and polish them all to bring out the color on the inside. And then I sort of assembled them on this like center pole in like modular sections that I epoxied together. And so this is inside the studio. And then I laid the whole thing out in my yard and then transported it. It was two truckloads to Falmouth. If anybody's down in Falmouth, this is now in front of the high school. So all of these pieces, this tower in the middle and this sort of patio area, came out of those two holes. It's called tessellation 3D, which tessellation is the sort of geometric tiling thing that's possible with hexagons and triangles. This is sort of another faster paced piece, more free form that I did last year. It was a temporary project for a temporary competition in Waterville, but fortunately they ended up buying the piece for the new riverfront park they were building, and I called it Riverstone. So it was very lucky that they were building that park at the same time. This is sort of a shift. For the past 3-4 years, my wife and I, who's a Japanese artist, we were looking for a place where we could actually get something done when we visit Japan. And I've always been fascinated with quarry islands because I grew up in Maine. And I always thought, wow, wouldn't it be great to have a studio on a quarry island? So I researched it. I found this island that has history going back to the 1600s, from the castle building era. So those stones stacked up there were stacked up there in 1600, and you can see where they split them when the tide is down. You can hunt octopus, harvest seaweed, and you can see where they split these stones out with wooden wedges 400 or 500 years ago. And similar, I call this the vinyl haven of Japan, because they started carving really early, and up until the 80s and 90s, it was a huge business. They were one of the big manufacturing hubs in Japan. Everything was still being shipped in the inland sea. This quarry is 100 or 200 feet below sea level. It's really cool if you see like a drone shot of the whole island with this thing in the middle. And so after 3 years, our goal originally was to make things that everything we made we could send through the mail. So they had to be like under 50 pounds in order to send them through the mail. So we'd start with something we could pick up, but things tend to escalate, and so one of the more successful companies that had moved off the island built this stone culture museum, and I was able to use one of the abandoned factories, and there were only 2 people left working there. Most of the time they were gone, so I was kind of there with the machinery and the overhead cranes, and I figured out a way to cut these 2 undulating forms out of these leftover pieces of granite and kind of notch them together, and that's it.
I started meeting weekly to discuss doing a project together. After months of discussion, we felt compelled to bring both of our unique voices together to create a collaborative work that addressed the current border issues that are dominating.
The best taco bowls are made in the Trump Tower Grill, and I love Hispanics.
We were inspired by humanitarian organizations working on the U.S.-Mexico border who are being prosecuted for leaving water in the desert to help save the lives of migrants. Like the proverbial glass half full, glass half empty, the act of compassion has become an issue of perspective.
Notice that illegal immigrants will be given Obamacare and free college tuition, but nothing has been mentioned about our veterans.
We're not talking about Obamacare or politics. We're talking about simply giving water to dying people. There have been increased documented cases of Border Patrol and local militia destroying these water supplies. In September, we traveled to the border and met with several organizations whose goal it is to end death and suffering in the borderlands. They work openly and in community to uphold fundamental human rights. The work is supported and carried out by representatives of all faiths. We also met and talked with several border
Sadly, it looks like Mexico's police and military are unable to stop the caravan heading to the southern border of the United States. Criminals and unknown Middle Easterners are mixed in. This is a national emergency.
From 2016 to 2017, roughly 300 people died in the Arizona desert. These numbers are underreported. Most migrants are desperate and poor. They're often taken advantage of by coyotes and traffickers, or are sometimes coerced into becoming drug mules.
We need to stop drugs, human trafficking, gang members, and criminals from coming into our country.
Death by dehydration is excruciating. It is impossible to carry the amount of water needed to survive these crossings. There are telltale signs, like plastic bottles full of urine, which migrants are forced to drink once water runs out.
We found prayer rugs out here. It's unreal. People coming across the southern border from many countries, some of which would be a big surprise.
We encountered numerous checkpoints. These are positioned in a way that forces migrants to walk further to avoid detection. Agents at these checkpoints are rotated frequently so they don't become too friendly and familiar with the locals. Relationships make it more difficult to do their job. Before the borders were militarized, it was much easier for humanitarian organizations to contact rangers and local law enforcement for help. There was a relationship there with better communication.
A design of our steel slat barrier, which is totally effective while at the same time beautiful.
The Great Seal of the United States shows the eagle holding an olive branch in its right talon and arrows in its left. The eagle faces right as justice favors peace. In its beak are the words E pluribus unum, of many, one. The motto is a symbol for diversity and for our shared humanity. Our goal with this project was to deconstruct the seal and to call attention to its original message of
I
unity.
am very proud to have brought the subject of illegal immigration back into the discussion. Such a big problem for our country. I will solve.
The other is the person who is different from you. Othering is actually a verb. It is the act of dehumanizing an individual or group. This makes it easier to deny basic human rights. Othering is done in subtle ways, often using language.
Democrats are the problem. They don't care about crime and want illegal immigrants, no matter how bad they may be, to pour into and infest our country.
Our project was based on making cyanotypes in the Sonoran Desert. Cyanotype is a developing process using photosensitive chemicals, UV light, and water. One day, while working on site in a remote area, a Border Patrol agent stopped to see what we were doing. She was very courteous, but also curious as to what we were doing in the desert with our trunk full of water bottles. We explained that we were using a gallon of water to process each of the prints, the same amount considered to be what one person needs in a day. We also explained that we were using the sun to develop the prints in the very location where people were dying from the effects of that sun. She was very cordial and interested in what we were doing. However, not long ago there were deaths in the custody of Border Patrol.
The two children in question were very sick before they were given over to Border Patrol. The father of the young girl said it was not their fault. He hadn't given her water in days. Border Patrol needs the wall, and it will all end.
The U.S. passport is an official document stating your place of belonging, who you are and your identity. It's also a symbol of freedom, the freedom to cross borders, freedom of mobility. Migration has been a natural human drive and necessity for thousands of
The
years.
fact is, there is nothing else that will work, and that has been true for thousands of years. It's like the wheel, there's nothing better. I know tech better than anyone, and technology.
St. Michael the Archangel is the patron saint of law enforcement. In iconography depicting St. Michael, he is the leader of all angels and of the army of God. These medallions show him slaying a dragon, symbolizing Satan and evil. Often, the words protect us are included.
Republicans want law, order, and justice.
The Virgin of Guadalupe is a patron saint of Mexico. She's depicted with brown skin with rays of sunlight that encircle her. She is a popular saint amongst the poorest of migrants, and images of her on rosaries often accompany them on their dangerous journey. Often the words protect us are included.
Democrats want anarchy, amnesty, and chaos.
In 1890, 100 European starlings were brought to the U.S. and set loose in New York by a man who wanted to populate Central Park with every bird mentioned in the works of Shakespeare. Today, there are 200 million starlings throughout the U.S.
For those that don't think a wall works, why don't they suggest taking down the fence around the White House, foolish people?
Medallia pinnata is the national flower of Mexico. The flower is a part of the Asteraceae family, which means that all of the pieces that look like petals are actually separate flowers. The Incas called this flower the water pipe flower due to its hollow, strong stem, which was once used to transport water.
We need the wall to help stop the massive inflow of drugs from Mexico, now rated the #1 most dangerous country in the world.
We're not talking about the wall here. We're not talking about border security. Aren't mercy and compassion part of being a human being, no matter what your affiliation, whether you want a wall or not? Is the glass of water half full or half empty? Or is it just water to a human being in need? Humanitarian aid is not a crime.
And this is not a presidential tweet. The passport, our identity as humans, e pluribus unum, we are all of us one. Humanity is a collaboration. Like the dahlia, we are many small flowers on the same bloom, and anyone in mortal distress, no matter who they are, deserves the compassion of a glass of water in the desert. Thank you.
Sculpture racing. People sculpture wheels, push-pulled and pedaled. Sculpture races happen worldwide, typically during festivals, and are often accompanied by an exhibition. Sculpture races are short races of less than a mile, where individuals, teams, community members, and families race human-powered contraptions that they build. Until recently, the closest one to us was in Cambridge, Mass. In the 1980s and was revived in 2015. When I heard about the Cambridge Sculpture Race, I was the artist in residence in the physics department at Harvard. So I cobbled together a team of staff and faculty, and collectively we designed a square-wheeled boat with a pulley system on the mast that rode over 3 12-foot-long catenary tracks. Needless to say, we were not looking to win first place. We pitched our proposal, which we named Sisyphus, along with a scale model, and it was accepted into the race. Our 6-member team worked for a month to build Sisyphus. We had a blast, and I learned that applied physicists really love to solve ridiculously challenging problems and build things, kind of like sculptors. Race day came, and we transported Sisyphus to the start line. Mind you, we had only given her a test run of about 100 feet. In order to move the 3 catenary tracks, we recruited a dozen wave slaves to leapfrog the tracks ahead of us as we pulleyed Sisyphus along. We actually ended up carrying her for half of the race. I won't keep you in suspense. We did not win. You see, not everyone goes for speed. Some race for the sake of creativity. Others for craftsmanship, uniqueness, engineering, innovation, daring, and wildness. What's the purpose of a sculpture race, you might ask? No one makes any money. There's no cash prizes. No one is advertising anything. It's an absurd waste of time, all for the sake of spectacle, fun, and community building. The original manifesto stated that one of the aims was to free artists from arbitrary judgments and give them the clear-cut winner status that only sports figures enjoy. Part street theater, part performance art, part sporting event, sculpture racing is to gallery shows what NASCAR is to auto museums. You see, sculpture racing is fun. Sculpture racing is serious. Sculpture racing is highbrow art. Sculpture racing is kitsch. Sculpture racing is absurd. Sculpture racing is obvious. Sculpture racing is paradoxical. Sculpture racing is a fad. Now, in its 3rd year, we have our own sculpture race in the Mid-Coast in Rockland. This was a mother and son team. I also work with 8th graders at the Camden Rockport Middle School, and he was one of the sculpture race entries. The school has their own race on Knowlton Street. They race up the hill, but he and his mom entered the race in Rockland as well. So this is another entry in the Rockland Sculpture Race, now in its 3rd year. And I think that he might have won the most ridiculous award, perhaps. This is Flotsam and Jetsam, which was created by the Martin Boys entirely out of found items in Vinyl Haven, a deconstructed lobster trap adorned with additional items that they found along the shore. very serious racers. This was Mr. Winky's art students at the South School in Rockland. They had already created a big papier-mâché shark, which when they learned about the sculpture race, they modified to include some wheels, and voila, they had a sculpture race entry. And this is Mid-Coast Bounding, which was a 4-generation family from the land down under. 98-year-old great-grandma holds baby Joey on her lap, and Mom and Grandma, the Aussie zookeepers, push the Kanga wheelchair. This picture was taken about 2 years ago, and great-grandma is still kicking. I'm hoping that you'll be enticed to build your own contraption for the upcoming Rockland Sculpture Race on June 15th. Keep in mind a few basic guidelines. The overriding aesthetic is spectacle. Movement must be human-powered. Wheels must be integral to the work. Kinetic elements are encouraged and can include performance, sound art, costumes, and kinetic objects. Awards are given for speed, people's choice, the most outlandish, best costumes, and the most successful failure. Proposals are submitted right up until the day of the race. It's my husband. But don't wait, because the first 10 entries get $100 for a supply allowance. You can find all the information on our website, rocklandsculpturerace.org.
In the fall of 2013, I decided to change my language from "I'm thinking about doing a thing" to "I'm doing a thing." And this thing would come to be called the Open Bench Project. Well, what is the Open Bench Project? It's an exploration into the processes needed to give ideas physical bodies. It's a clubhouse. It's like a gym with tools. It's a personal passion, a platform for learning and sharing and creating. It's a makerspace, a place for play and courage. It's my job. So I started squatting in the summer of 2014 on a long-forgotten spit of land on the edge of town. It was a place that had been a home to the homeless, a refuge for musicians, and in general an unwatched escape right on our doorstep. Earlier that year, I had been organizing classes around making at various people's shops, and the OBP needed a place of its own. So I had gotten a key from the owners of this rundown building so I could show folks what I was thinking about. And without really asking permission, I started to improve the space. It started simply as sweeping and organizing so that the space would present better, but soon enough, my work crept beyond organizing, and I started fixing things. A broken water line, removing some mildewed carpet, and a few rotten interior walls. Before I knew it, these rotten walls gave way to walls that were simply in my way, and then I started to add some walls, and then a bathroom, and a heating system. Eventually, someone joined me, and then another, and a few more. By December, there would be 17 of us. By March, we were over 50, and at the end of the year, more than 200 people had joined the Open Bench Project. We were growing. We were running classes, letting kids learn, connecting community members, and helping small businesses. I talked a lot about the importance of trying, about doing what's in your heart, about failing fast and forward. And I worked hard to create a culture where it was okay for things not to work, the important thing being that you tried. But we had forgotten one little thing, a lease. See, while it was great that the owners had allowed us to squat, with no lease we had no control. And by the summer of 2016, it was clear that we were going to need to move. The area was developing, and we were in the way. But we were offered another location by a different owner, another squat, this time in even worse condition. And so we packed up our things and we moved to another building. And again, as before, we began to fix things up, trusting that we would eventually get a reasonable lease. In February, however, we were asked by the building owners to stop all activity. We would not be able to continue where we were without first investing tens of thousands of more dollars into a building that we could get kicked out of with just 30 days notice. I was crushed. Everything we had built was in jeopardy. The instability of it all was becoming ever more clear to me, and I was unsure of what we should do. I felt completely lost. I had become ashamed of and was in denial of my own project's shortcomings, its failure, the very thing I had encouraged other people to embrace. See, it turns out that admitting to and accepting the shortcomings of a passion project is hard. I had become overly invested in the initial model and was unable to see that it was simply not working. I needed to be honest about how the project was failing and how I needed to ask for help. And so I talked with a bunch of members, and I got really good feedback. I did a lot of soul searching. If we spent more money, we could continue on our same path, but the OBP as it was constructed was fundamentally flawed. And so by May of 2017, I had made the decision that we would indeed move. OBP was once again without a home. And so we went back to our roots, running classes in other people's spaces while looking for a stable place of our own. And then a funny thing happened. Something that surprised me and gave me both pause and hope. 65 people maintained their membership at OBP when we had no shop. Month after month, paying. For what? What I came to realize was that these people believed in what OBP stood for. For them, it wasn't a product, but it was a purpose. It was an ideal. As it turns out, we had a community. And this community reached out to me with supportive notes and advice. Members connected with one another in helpful ways, coming together beyond the walls of the shop. And it made it very clear to me that OBP was about more than space and tools. And eventually we found a new location with a stable lease. In October of 2017, OBP reopened its doors at 971 Congress Street after being closed for nearly a year. This time, our core community had been tempered a bit more, forged stronger through common struggle. And today we have approximately 155 members, and I have focused more than ever on the community aspects of the space, on the sharing, the helping, the teaching, and the learning. And now when I speak about makers asking for forgiveness instead of permission, I'm a bit more cautious. I add that makers really need to ask permission of themselves. Right? If this all blows up and it goes totally sideways on you, will you forgive yourself for trying? I'm glad I did not give up. I learned a lot about myself and about others through this process. So what is OBP? It's a third making things, it's a third learning how things are made, and it's a third social experiment. What happens when you start with trust, when you share what you have, and when you can be comfortable with your imperfections? I was once the smartest guy in the room until someone joined me, and I've been sharing that title ever since. So I encourage you to spend a little time this week looking deeply at the built world around you. Tell someone about your idea and take a step towards that idea. And when you fail, as we all certainly do, get back up and brush yourself off and remember that sometimes when you try to push the world pushes back. Thanks.
So I'm from here, I'm working with watercolors these days, so that's the type of, oh yeah. Alrighty, there we go. So yeah, I'm working with watercolors these days, and I grew up here and then I moved out west, was a wilderness guide, and the first big project I worked on, I went down to South America, and, do I do that thing or is it gonna change?
Oh, so you have to change the first one.
Okay.
And if you want to walk around, you can move the mic.
Cool. Do I hit this? There we go. So my first big project down in South America. I took 8 months and I walked from Patagonia. I walked and I cycled north up through the Patagonia mountains and the Andes, exploring the people that lived in those mountains and engaging with them and living with them for short periods of time and documenting it as I went. And it was about documenting the landscape, but also the people. This is what I really got hooked on, and as Millie was talking about, for me, this is what was capturing, is the eyes of the people, the characters of the people, and it was about how do I take these images and then create a series of paintings that can be visually enticing, but also engage with an audience. And so this was the first series of paintings I did. I took 6 months in Ecuador and painted paintings from that project, but also portraits of people from my other travels around the world. and just portrait studies, figuring out how do you draw a person, how do you make it look like a person, how do you do the technical elements. I then brought that body of work back to Maine and found that those portraits weren't relevant to here. They didn't connect with people here. They were a study, but there wasn't a fit. And so for me, it was this question as an artist of how do I do what I want to do, which is portraiture, and how do I do it in a place where it connects. So I went to the drawing board, and I started this project focusing on the old-time lobstering communities around Penobscot Bay. And it was all watercolors. I spent 6 weeks out on the water fishing with all these folks, and went to the studio, started this series of paintings that these days, I don't know how many watercolor artists we have, but the paper I use is primarily hot press, so it's a smoother paper, and you have 90 weight, you have 140 of 300, kind of the middleweight paper is what I really like working on. These are 15 by 22 inch paintings, watercolors, and for me, one big exploration is how do I walk the line between making it really representational and realistic, but also how do I let paint do what paint needs to do? Because I'm a photographer and I don't need to paint photos. And so playing with technique has been a really big thing for me with watercolors. And this one's 22 by 30. These four, what I wanted to highlight with these were the washes. So I do 3 or 4 layers of painting before I start any of the detail on the figures. And so it's about holding the paper upright and using a spray bottle and using a dripper to bring water on top of pigment and get it to move. This is a more extreme example of that. The one in the middle is just pretty messy, really. But there then is an element of detail of this man looking out and to the right. And so it's this line of not only how do you make it realistic and whatnot, but how far can you push it and what techniques can you tie in. This is one of my favorites. You have on their beards, on their hats, in their hair, that's all salt that does that. So you put pigment on paper, while it's wet you sprinkle salt on top, and it absorbs the water, but leaves the pigment behind. And this is one technique that I tend to go a little bit crazy with, really. This one is from my most recent project. This is a young woman who is a boat builder here in New England, and this project is focusing on traditional wooden boat building right around here. And for me, this painting is playing with how little information can I give to reveal something. I've been working on these this week, so these are in progress. The bandsaws have not been completed, but this is my day-to-day these days. I go to over 35 boat shops from here south in New England, and focusing on the individuals, the tools, their hands, and the boats, and the shops, so all sorts of stuff. This one for me, I wanted to put up because there's a bunch of other artists, I imagine you guys all have experienced when you're working on something and you stand back and you're like, man, how did I do that? That's like really good. Hands are hard for me, and they're daunting, and I try to avoid hands kind of, but those hands worked out. So that's the project I'm working on right now. Looking ahead, I'll be working on that project this coming winter. The following summer of 2020, I have this new project proposal out there. So I want to brainstorm with you guys, but it's about going out to Acre Island, 700-acre island, which is between Lincolnville Beach and Hillsborough. In the 70s, my father built this log cabin on Acre Island. It's got no electricity, no running water. It's run off propane. I lived there when I was 18, and I want to go back, and I'll walk 45 minutes to the other end of the island and paint in my great-great-grandfather's art studio. He built it at the turn of the century.